It is the most scrutinized, most mythologized, and most ardently defended library on Earth. In the heart of Vatican City, just blocks from the fervent crowds of St. Peter's Basilica, there exists a sanctuary unlike any other. It is not a place of worship, but of knowledge. The Vatican Apostolic Library and, hidden within its walls, the infamous Vatican Apostolic Archive, once have circulated like smoke. Whispers of suppressed gospels, documents proving alien contact, the true fate of the Knights Templar, and maps of continents that vanished before Christ. But the true story, often obscured by Dan Brown thrillers and conspiracy theories, is infinitely more astonishing. It is the real-life tale of a single institution that became the world's most powerful memory vault, preserving texts from the ashes of the Roman Empire, navigating the chaos of the Renaissance, and surviving the fury of Napoleon. This is a story of popes as bibliophiles, of lost pages reappearing in the vaults of the Inquisition, and of dedicated scholars battling centuries of dust and political intrigue to uncover a breathtaking collection that traces humanity's journey from antiquity to the present. The secrets held here are not fiction. They are the forgotten, factual blueprints of our civilization. Part 1. The Memory of the West. Chapter 1. The Genesis of the Sacred Shelves. The story of the Vatican Library is not a story of vaults and locks. It is a story of survival. Its true genesis lies not with the modern Vatican state, but with the crumbling ruins of the Roman Empire in the 4th and 5th centuries. As barbarian armies swept across Italy, burning, looting, and collapsing the state structures that held vast libraries, the nascent Christian church, centered in Rome, became an unlikely custodian of classical learning. The earliest papal archives were not libraries in the modern sense. They were scattered collections of essential documents, records of martyr trials, property deeds, and the official decrees of the growing church. This primitive archive, known as the Scrinium, served as the memory of the early Roman popes. It was a humble collection, repeatedly dispersed, stolen, and damaged over the next 1,000 years, a history that proves the Church was never concerned with hiding documents, but rather with preventing their total destruction. A significant breakthrough came during the Renaissance, a period often viewed as a flowering of secular art and science, but which was, for the Church, a desperate intellectual catch-up. Pope Nicholas V, 1447 to 1455, is the true intellectual father of the modern institution. Driven by a passionate belief that knowledge is power, Nicholas V resolved to build a library that would be the intellectual center of the world, housing texts from all cultures, Greek, Latin, Hebrew, and Arabic. He believed that showcasing the Church as the preserver of all knowledge would reinforce its spiritual and temporal authority. Nicholas V dispatched agents across Europe and the collapsing Byzantine East to retrieve lost manuscripts. These agents arrived in Rome carrying priceless works, the medical treatises of Galen, the philosophical dialogues of Plato, and the epic poems of Homer. When Nicholas V died, the collection stood at over 1,200 volumes, a massive undertaking for the era, and was officially catalogued for the first time. The library was formally established and housed by Pope Sixtus IV in 1475 in new quarters designed by architect Giacomo Grimaldi. This was a public statement. The original library, which existed for nearly a century before the current building, was housed in magnificent halls, not hidden vaults. Scholars were invited, texts were made available, and the papacy openly advertised its role as the keeper of civilization's lamp. However, the sheer wealth of documents generated by the papacy itself, the correspondence, financial records, treaties, and investigation results, began to swell. These administrative papers, essential for the governance of the Church, were deemed too sensitive for the main reading room. They were increasingly sequestered into private, guarded chambers. This distinction between the public library of purchased texts and the secure archive of internal papal documents was the real, practical origin of the Secret Archives. Chapter 2. The Architects of Secrecy. The true institutionalization of secrecy occurred during the late 16th and early 17th centuries, driven not by a desire to hide religious doctrines, but by the relentless political and religious battles of the Counter-Reformation. The collection of sensitive papal documents was formally separated from the library by Pope Paul V in 1610 and moved to what would become their permanent home in the Apostolic Palace. He gave it the title Archivum Secretum Apostolicum Vaticanum, or the Vatican Apostolic Secret Archive. The word secretum in the title is the key to understanding the archive's purpose and a major source of modern confusion. In 17th century Latin, secretum did not primarily mean hidden or clandestine. It meant private or personal, signifying that the contents belonged to the Pope himself and were not under the jurisdiction of the curial offices. It was an administrative designation, not a statement of intent to deceive the world. But this administrative label was enforced by a very real security apparatus. The contents were sensitive. Diplomatic correspondence with every monarchy in Europe, reports from the Inquisition on heresy trials, and the detailed records of the Council of Trent. These documents were the bloodline of papal power, and their disclosure could plunge Europe into war or heresy. The archive's most enduring symbol of its power and secrecy is the armadio, or cupboard, of the Inquisition. This massive, elaborately carved wooden cabinet, still located in the archive, housed the records of the Holy Office, the body responsible for protecting Catholic doctrine. These volumes contain the original trial transcripts of figures like Galileo Galilei and Bruno Forgetto. For centuries, these records were utterly inaccessible, and the simple sight of this cabinet became, for scholars and conspiracists alike, the tangible proof of the Church's long history of suppression. Chapter 3. The Lost Treasures and Napoleon's Haste. The greatest challenge to the archive's existence, and the event that most scholars credit for the current cautious attitude towards access, was the intervention of Napoleon Bonaparte. In 1810, having conquered much of Europe, Napoleon, a man keenly aware of the symbolic power of knowledge, ordered the entire Vatican archive, over 3 centuries of history, to be transported to Paris. It was an unprecedented intellectual heist. Hundreds of carts, laden with over 3,200 wooden crates containing irreplaceable historical records, were painstakingly transported across the Alps to be catalogued and integrated into the French national collection. This was a cultural catastrophe, tearing the memory of the papacy from its context. Napoleon's defeat in 1815 initiated the agonizing process of retrieval. However, the costs were immense, the logistics nightmarish, and many French officials were reluctant to relinquish the priceless documents. The papacy post-Napoleon could only afford to retrieve 2/3 of the looted collection. The result, thousands of documents, the records of certain investigations, correspondence with minor European states, and countless financial ledgers were simply lost, scattered across the French archive system, or deemed too costly to repatriate. This real, documented loss of irreplaceable records instilled in the Vatican a profound sense of institutional trauma and a heightened security protocol. The lesson learned was stark. The archives must be guarded not from curious scholars, but from the destructive political forces of the world. Known as the Secret Archives. For centuries, stories